Okay, how's everybody doing today? Good, decent. All right. Um, so today is our last day. Okay, okay. Today's our last day with our book. Um, we finished the book for today. Um, Seniors, it's the last English book you're reading at SEM. There you go. You're all done with that. Now you can go burn the digital copy somewhere. Okay, I gotta get up. Okay, are you okay? So today we're going to wrap it up. We're going to wrap up the book. So just want to talk to you about what we're going to do today and Thursday. Because Thursday is our last class of the week, also last class for the seniors. So Thursday, Thursday we're going to take some time to talk about what what we read and what we watched, because we've really been focusing on Algeria. Sorry. We're focusing on Algeria primarily, even though this class is called North African Literature. What we have been reading and watching, it was supposed to take a lot smaller part of our time, but with the us moving to distance learning, it's I had to spread it out a bit. So we're focused on representations of Algeria in literature and in film. So we'll take some time to sort of think about the film, The Battle of Algiers, The Stranger, and this book here, how they all work together, at least to give us a little picture of what Algeria, how it's represented, and how writers from Algeria think about it, its history with colonialism. All these texts work together, right? And I think Mousseau investigation takes also from the Battle of Algiers, like the images of the revolution, of this fight for independence. We get that in this book, with our narrator being criticized for not joining in that fight. But we also get a book with Mousseau investigation responding to earlier, The Stranger, that kind of ignores Arab Algerians and them living in this country. So all of these texts work together to help, like they can talk to one another. So we'll take some time to sort of wrap all those things up. All right, all three together. We'll wrap all those up together. That's what Thursday's class will be like. I'm also going to ask you a question. I want you to answer through a Google question. That's going to focus on those three things. I want you to think about, were there any threads, things that you found that connect these three pieces together? What connects them together besides them just being set in Algeria and mainly Algiers? So that's the thing I want you all to think about and respond to. That'll be up. The question will be up later today. It'll be due Thursday. So it's our last, for everyone, the last thing that we'll be doing all together. You seniors and juniors will be doing all together. All right. So that's our last thing. But today we're just going to wrap up the book. We've taken 2 weeks to read through it. It's a really short book, so I think doing it small, piece by piece, is helpful. You don't have to read a whole lot all at once. The last section that we did read was the longest section. I think maybe 40 pages or so, maybe less than that. But I just want to get your impressions on the book. What did you think of it? What were just your sort of overall impressions of this novel?
I liked it more than The Stranger.
Why'd you like it more than The Stranger?
I felt it was easier to relate to the main character than it was to Marceau.
Okay. Why is this character more easily relatable than Marceau in The Stranger?
I think just because of Marceau's sort of his lack of any emotion in it.
Okay, so his lack of emotion can make him unrelatable. I think that's a very astute point that a character like Merceau in The Stranger, lacking any sort of emotional connection, makes him hard to like even care about him. But it also makes it, should we even care about him as a character in The Stranger? Um, all right, any other impressions about our Merceau investigation here?
Yeah, I like this one a lot better than the first one because I agree with August. I think it was better. Like I can connect more with the character in this book, and I also liked like learning more about like Musa and like I guess like Algeria and stuff.
Okay, okay. So you like hearing about these characters? Because I remember you said somewhere earlier when we first started reading the book, you sort of connected more with this
Yeah,
novel than the previous one. Um, so having these names attached to these characters, even though they are fictional, right? Is
yeah,
still there's still something to connect to, and that's what's really powerful about stories. That yes, they're imaginary, they're fictional, but stories are powerful in that we can connect to somebody or a character because maybe we see ourselves in them too. That they represent who we are, or maybe not in terms of like our daily lives, and maybe our emotions. I are connected with those emotions or these feelings that a character is feeling. So there's something powerful in that. Great, thank you. Any other thoughts about this book?
I feel like the two main characters are like kind of similar, and I think we saw that more in the end. It's like,
Hmm.
and they even pointed it out too, how he was like, I can see that I'm like very similar to him, and I kind of noticed it throughout the book. But obviously, like Ron shows more emotion, and like he's definitely very angry, which obviously is like understandable. But also like with his mom too, like they both didn't really like their mom and didn't have good relationships, and like their fathers both kind of abandoned them. So you can see how like they had similar backgrounds, which led them to become similar.
No, yeah, I think it's a great point, Grace. I think it's a really good point to make, especially at the end of the novel. The novel kind of takes almost word for word from The Stranger at the very end. The whole section where Haran is talking with the Imam, um, basically, the Imam is like, "Why aren't you like? Do you believe in God?" And he has the same exact response that Merceau has to the priest. I think it might. I didn't check. I meant to check it out if it's word for word, but it felt like it feels exactly the same from The Stranger. So our narrator here is, as he points out, he's like, I felt like I was reading myself in The Stranger with Merceau. Like I was Merceau. And as like it does become much clearer just how paralleled these two characters are. Even though in the Merceau investigation he's very critical of The Stranger, there's a lot of similarities between these characters. There's a lot in terms of these personalities, but also in our novel, there's a bit more maybe warmth. I don't know if it's the best word to use, but there's actually more emotion here. As Gracie pointed out, he's angry. There's anger there. Whereas Merceau, I could never say he's angry or happy or sad or anything. There's emotion here. It's more. It feels more human in this book, but they do have this connection. They have a lot of similarities in terms of how they see and perceive the world. Um, my cat is shedding because it's getting so warm out. Any other thoughts on this book? Make it like, um, so
It was fine. I liked it more than the other one, but
okay. Um, so did you think you understood this book better having read The Stranger first? Okay, so you're saying yes. Um, why is that? Why like do you have to read The Stranger in order to understand this book? Would it be yeah, George, I see your hand up.
I think it would be like if you read this book without reading The Stranger or at least knowing something like you have to know something about the stranger to be able to fully understand this book
Hmm.
because a lot of the times like it talks about stuff that happens in the stranger, but it also like there's a lot of references there, and I don't know how to word
Hmm.
this. Like
No, I think I know the idea of references. Like,
like it references a whole bunch in the stranger, but it also like at the end it was like almost exactly like the stranger, so I feel like it would be
right,
hard to understand what's going on in this book if you don't know what's happening or if you don't know anything about the stranger.
right. No, I think the idea of references matters. And so, yeah, I see your hand.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that, I mean, you might get like the idea of what the story is about without reading The Stranger. I think like he's pretty thorough describing stuff. But I feel like you wouldn't get the whole like art of literature. I don't know if this makes sense. I'm
No,
kind of
no, yeah,
rambling, but like the deep sense of this book, I don't think you would possibly get it if you didn't read The Stranger.
right. So, yeah, I think you all are right in that respect, right? That there are things that if you hadn't read The Stranger, if you read this, you can still get a good sense of what happened in that previous book, or you can just understand it. Maybe like, okay, there's this previous book that depicted his brother in a certain way. He used the word Arab like 26 times with never a name. You can still get a good idea, but there are so many points, as you've all noted, that directly pull from Camus' novel, and that makes for a richer reading for us. Like when you notice something that's like, oh, I read this before, and it's happening in this book too. Like you're making those connections, and those connections can make for your reading experience a much more enjoyable experience, a much richer and deeper reading experience. Um, so that's the reason, why I we were reading this as like as a novel of North Africa, right? A part of North African literature, whereas a stranger is not usually put in that place. It's usually viewed as European literature because of Camus being French, but also of lived in Algeria, and he has a really complicated relationship. And our narrator talks about this. He's like people are more worried about whether or not the author is what his nationality is on page 138, right? Um, in the scuffle, nobody wondered what Musa's nationality was. He's referred to as the Arab, even by Arabs. Tell me, is that a nationality, Arab? Where is it? Where is it? Oh, is that part? The worst is when a pack of moon dogs started fighting and ripping one another apart to establish whether your hero the same nationality as me or the people who shared his building. So even our narrator and the author here is critiquing that question at all. That's not the big deal here. Camus' nationality or Meursault's nationality is not the issue. The murder is the issue. The fact that somebody's been wiped away from life, not given a name, that's the issue. So that question of whether the stranger is North African or not, if it's European or not, this book's saying that doesn't matter. That's a question that doesn't matter. Um, and it's a major critique of how people have talked about the stranger. I sort of referenced that at the beginning when we first talked about the stranger, right? I was like, we're reading this because of Camus' weird connection with Algeria and whether or not he's Algerian and so forth and so forth. This novel would tell me, shut up, that's not an issue, be quiet. Um, so that's something to think about, that these novels are not just books, like there are entertainment, right? There's stories, but stories can have a lot of power. Stories can do and try to change the world in different ways. And this novel is trying to tell us, or trying to make the point or the argument that everything we've been talking about in terms of the stranger, all that stuff, it doesn't matter when what it's doing is erasing people, when it's erasing names and making like a generic Arab figure. So that's the critique, that this novel is sort of leveling against The Stranger. And I think it's important to recognize that these books are doing that. That a lot of, I think I said this before, a good portion of African literature has done that, critiqued European representations of Africa and like pointing what Europe gets wrong about Africa through literature. And through literature, changing perspective, giving us different perspectives, giving us new ideas to think about the world and think about other people. There's my little rant. Any other thoughts on the book? So, getting to the end of this book, it ends very, very similar to The Stranger. But it also sort of throws back at us the question of whether or not, and this is how we open the whole conversation about this book, whether or not our narrator is reliable. That's the first thing we talk about with this novel, whether or not the narrator is reliable. And so at the end, the narrator, if I have it, did I get it right? He basically says, oh yeah, on page 143, do you find my story suitable? Because he's talking to a young graduate student who we find out is sort of somebody else has done the same work already, Miriam, who has met our narrator many years prior into the same exact work. This story, he's already told this story before to a different person, but they never related it to anybody. So at the end of the novel, our narrator in the very last paragraph says, or the second to last, do you find my story suitable? That's all I can offer you. It's my word. I'm Moose's brother or nobody's. Just a compulsive liar you met with so you met with so you could fill up your notebook. It's your choice, my friend. He's like, no one has ever met him, not even Musa, and no one knows if his story is true or not. Talking about God. He's like, everything I just told you, you don't know whether or not it's true. You have to be the one to determine if you believe it or not. Maybe I made things up, but now you just filled up your notebook, maybe with lies. Maybe I just lied the entire time to you. Maybe I did tell you the truth. As he says, just a compulsive liar you met with. So all of a sudden, the end of the novel is like, you can buy this narrative. You can believe this narrative if you want. But all of a sudden, it's like, but I'm unreliable because I'm going to tell you, you can, maybe all this is just a lie. Which then is like, well, what's the point of the story if it's all a lie? So it's making us question the reliability of our narrator all the same. But I found myself, even with us talking about if he's reliable or not, believing him. As I went through, I started forgetting about the reliability and more like, I'm into his story. I believe his story. I don't know how you all felt about that, but I think it's important at the end. He's like, I'm unreliable. Believe me if you wish to believe me, but that's your choice. And that's important to think about too. We are part of stories. Whatever story we read, news stories, we watch movies, documentaries, or read anything, the story tries to convince us, but we have to decide if we believe it or not. We're the ones who are like, on an individual basis, do I buy the story? Do I believe it or not? What holes can I poke into the story? Obviously, this is fiction, but it's still doing that same work. Believe which stories you want to believe. Why do you believe them? What makes a story believable to you? Do you trust who's talking to you? And why should you trust them? All stories rely upon us asking those questions about ourselves and whether or not we believe something. Okay, I think those are all of my thoughts reading through the end of this book. I mean, we meet other characters. Miriam, who's introduced at the very, very, very end, after he's killed the man, and Miriam's trying to find out who Musa was, and so forth and so forth. And our narrator falls in love, but that love is soon destroyed because she's only there for a little bit. So you get more personal experiences with relationships with women, and we see it fall apart, and he's never really had a solid relationship ever since. His mother, he doesn't really talk to his mother anymore. He's just a man who's just sitting alone in a bar without the graduate student there to talk to. He really doesn't have anybody to talk to. We also find out the ghost, the bar ghost, right at the end. He's deaf, but also he's mute. So he's been telling the story the entire time, fearing the guys can be hearing him and he's hearing the story. But we find out at the end that he couldn't hear anything, nor can he speak about the story at all. So we have this novel that kind of ends in a very similar tone as The Stranger. Whether or not that's fulfilling, that's one thing. But at least this book is trying to like rebuttal The Stranger a little bit, give us different perspectives. And that's kind of exciting. I always like those kind of books and stories. Any final thoughts on the book? Okay, so we'll end that there for today. I hope you've enjoyed these two books together. It's a different experience, I think, to read two stories that are so interconnected, written by two different authors, and one is rebutting another one. We don't really have, I don't think we've done that much at STEM in terms of the English classes. Maybe you have before, but this is like I said, part of a recent African literary tradition, also in the Caribbean, places that are not British or American. A lot of authors take those earlier stories and make them new, make them different. So this is part of that tradition. All right. So it's not just North African, but this is a larger sphere of literature that's rebutting against earlier narratives to make something new, to give different voices, give different perspectives. Okay. All right. So Thursday, we'll take some time to wrap everything all up from what we've done so far. Okay. So Thursday will be that day. And then, yeah, we'll go from there. All right. I will see you all on Thursday. Bye, everybody.